Tamsin Everhart always thought she'd die in a more glamorous way, maybe choking on a fancy canapé at a corporate gala or being suffocated by a mountain of interstellar paperwork. But no, it looked like her end was coming courtesy of a malfunctioning fuel cell in the arse end of space. She could almost hear the eulogy now. Here lies Tamsin, victim of budget cuts and alien incompetence. She cursed under her breath, the words nearly drowned out by the screech of metal on metal. Hey Tamsin, you plan on fixing that or just staring at it hoping it'll fix itself, called her teammate Jax from the other side of the cramped service tunnel. Jax had a face that looked like it had argued with a plasma welder and lost, repeatedly. His wit was sharper than his cheekbones, though, which was saying something. Yeah, Jax, let me just whip out my magic wand and poof it all better, Tamsin shot back, rolling her eyes. The repair drone she was wrangling into position was about as cooperative as a drunken porcupine. You should have read the fine print in your contract, Tamsin, Jax replied, chuckling. No magic wands, just overworked engineers and faulty tech. The interplanetary highway was more of a death trap than a convenience these days. Once a marvel of human ingenuity, now it was a daily reminder that progress came with a side of existential dread. Aliens were supposed to be the big brains in the galaxy, yet here they were mucking things up like the worst of them. How's it looking, Everhart? The voice crackled over the comms, and Tamsin could picture her boss, Alec, sitting comfortably in his cushy office back on the main station, probably sipping a coffee that cost more than her weekly food budget. Like a Picasso, boss, she replied, maneuvering the drone with the finesse of a sleep-deprived octopus, which is to say a complete mess. Alec's sigh was audible even through the static. Just get it done. I'd like this section operational by the end of the cycle if possible. Oh sure, let me just bend space-time real quick, Tamsin muttered, her fingers flying over the controls. The drone twitched, reluctantly obeying her commands. Jax snorted. Maybe Zareth can help with that. You know, while he's busy underestimating us primitives. Zareth, the alien leader with a superiority complex larger than the Milky Way, was hell-bent on making Tamsin's job a living nightmare. He dismissed human biotech as if it were a relic from the Dark Ages, while ironically relying on it to keep half the highway from collapsing. Do you really think he believes his own crap about humans? Tamsin asked, mostly rhetorical. Jax shrugged. Arrogance blinds more than a solar flare. Let him think we're just monkeys banging rocks together. Gives us the element of surprise, the drone whirred to life, finally aligning with the fuel cell. A small victory, but in Tamsin's world, those were the only kind left. Fuel cells stable, she announced, wiping sweat from her brow. For now, Alec's voice crackled back, laced with a hint of relief. Good work, Everhart. Now get back here in one piece. Can't promise that, but I'll try. Her attempts at optimism sounded hollow even to her. She knew better than to expect anything but trouble in this line of work. Back aboard their rickety vessel, which they affectionately called the Tin Can, Tamsin and Jax settled into their seats with the grace of two people who'd forgotten what rest felt like. Think we'll get hazard pay for this? Jax asked, peeling off his work gloves. Tamsin laughed, a sharp bark. Yeah, when pigs fly and Zareth admits he's wrong about us. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden lurch. The Tin Can was about as reliable as a politician's promise, and twice as prone to unexpected detours. What now? Tamsin groaned, eyes flicking to the control panel which had lit up like a festive tree. Jax grinned, a feral kind of joy lighting up his battered face. Looks like we've got company. Alien company. Tamsin felt the blood drain from her face. How many? Jax's fingers flew over the controls, eyes narrowing at the readouts. Enough to have us sweating in places we didn't know could sweat. The ship shuddered again, this time with the unmistakable impact of weapons fire. Oh, for the love of, Tamsin swore, strapping herself in. Brace for evasive maneuvers, Jax shouted as if it were necessary. The aliens are really selling the whole we come in peace thing, aren't they? Tamsin quipped, hands gripping her seat for dear life. Jax's laughter was a wild cackle over the chaos. Yeah, like a wolf inviting sheep over for dinner. The ship danced through the stars, an ungainly waltz of desperation and luck. Every gut-wrenching twist and turn was punctuated by the screech of metal and the groan of protesting engines. Tamsin, get to the turrets, Jax barked, taking over the controls. Oh sure, let me just sprout extra limbs, she grumbled, unbuckling herself with a fluid motion despite the ship's erratic movements. The turret was a relic from a bygone era, much like the rest of the ship, but it was reliable in the same way an old dog might be reliable, not great on speed, but loyal when needed. She settled into the seat, fingers wrapping around the controls. Let's see if the aliens like a taste of human hospitality, she muttered, aiming at the offending ships. Her shots rang out, cutting through the void with a silent scream. One alien ship veered off course, trailing smoke. Take that, Zareth, she growled. Jax's voice crackled over the intercom. Nice shooting, Tex. Maybe if you're lucky, they'll put that on your tombstone. Tamsin grinned, adrenaline singing in her veins. If I'm lucky, I'll live long enough to write my own. More shots, more misses, but each strike brought a grim satisfaction. Here in the cold, uncaring expanse of space, every victory was personal. Jax swung the ship around, narrowly avoiding a plasma burst. Why do I get the feeling they're not just here for tea and biscuits? Tamsin's grin widened. Maybe they heard about our winning personalities, as if your sunny disposition wasn't enough to scare them off, Jax retorted, his laughter merging with the hum of the engines. The battle continued, a chaotic dance of survival and defiance. Each hit they took was a reminder of their mortality, yet with each return fire they affirmed their existence. The tin can shuddered violently, alarms blaring a deafening chorus. Tamsin swore, her fingers flying over the turret controls. Just hold together a little longer, she pleaded, not entirely sure if she was talking to the ship or herself. Jax's voice was a steady anchor in the storm. We're almost out of this mess. Just keep them off our backs a little more. Tamsin nodded, though he couldn't see it. She fired again, the turret jerking in response. Another direct hit, another alien ship spiraled into oblivion. Hope they brought their insurance forms, she muttered, sweat trickling down her neck. The ship lurched, a sudden burst of speed propelling them forward as Jax found an opening. See ya, suckers, he called, the glee in his voice infectious. Tamsin laughed, a breathless sound. Next time, let's invite them for chat instead of a shootout. What, and spoil their fun, Jax replied, steering them away from the battle. They escaped the fray, the stars a blur outside the cockpit. It wasn't victory, not in the traditional sense, but they were alive. Sometimes that was enough. As the adrenaline faded, exhaustion settled in. Tamsin's muscles ached, her eyes heavy. She slumped back in her seat, letting out a long sigh. We're gonna need a bigger bottle of whiskey after this one. Jax chuckled, his expression one of exhausted triumph. Add it to the list. The comm crackled to life again, Alex's voice breaking the silence. You two still in one piece, barely, Tamsin replied. But yeah, we're still kicking. Alex's sigh was one of relief. Good, we need you back here. Seems like the aliens aren't quite done playing. Tamsin exchanged a glance with Jax. Great, just what I needed. More quality time with Zarath's fan club. Well, at least they seem to like us, Jax said, grinning despite the situation. Tamsin shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Yeah, they like us dead. And with that, they set course back to base, ready to face whatever fresh hell awaited them. After all, what was life without a little chaos? The comm link buzzed again, the persistent drone of Alex's voice filling the cockpit. News just in. Our alien friends are planning a little shindig on the interplanetary highway. Word is they're bringing the whole band. Tamsin groaned, leaning back in her seat. Great, an alien jamboree. Just what the universe needed. Jax snorted, running a hand through his unkempt hair. Maybe they'll start a Kanga line. You think Zarath leads, or is he more of a backup dancer? Probably neither, Tamsin replied, scowling at the blinking lights on the barely functioning console. More like the guy who shows up and pretends he owns the place. Alex's voice came through again, crackling like someone had decided to chew on the comm wires for fun. I need you two back here yesterday. We need to figure out how to deal with this before they turn the highway into their personal playground. On our way, Boss Tamsin replied, pulling up the nav chart. But don't expect miracles. We're fresh out of those. Jax adjusted their course, the tin can groaning in protest. So how do you think we tell Earth's leaders that we're about to get an alien invasion shoved up our collective back end? Tamsin smirked. With charm and grace, of course, and maybe a few strategically placed explosions. Sure, because they're famous for their level-headed responses, Jax quipped, locking in their trajectory. As they shot through the void, Tamsin's mind wandered to the so-called leaders they were supposed to contact. It was like trying to herd cats if cats had egos the size of small planets and a penchant for infighting. Each faction on Earth thought they had it all figured out, and each was uniquely wrong in their own special way. You think they'll listen this time? Jax asked, as if reading her thoughts. Who knows, maybe the threat of imminent destruction will finally get their attention, Tamsin replied, though she didn't hold her breath. Or maybe they'll just argue over who gets to blame who when it all goes to hell. The ship shuddered again, and Tamsin cast a wary eye at the flickering panels. Hold together, you rust bucket. We're not done with you yet, you talking to the ship or me. Jax grinned, his eyes still on the nav chart. Both, but only one of you listens. Tamsin shot back, shaking her head. They entered the station's airspace, the sprawling structure looming ahead like a misplaced skyscraper in the middle of space. It was a patchwork mess of modules and extensions, each one added with the finesse of a drunk engineer. Docking was an exercise in patience and colorful vocabulary, but eventually they clamped the tin can onto the station's hull. Tamsin and Jax made their way through the corridors, their weary steps echoing through the metal passages. Alec met them in the control hub, his face a mask of poorly concealed stress. Glad to see you made it back. We've got a situation. What else is new? Jax muttered, earning him a sharp look from Alec. Our sources indicate the aliens are planning a full-scale offensive, Alec continued, ignoring the comment. They're looking to seize control of the highway and cut off our supply routes. Tamsin crossed her arms, skepticism etched into her features. And we're supposed to stop them how, exactly? With stern looks and harsh language, we need to warn Earth, Alec insisted. Get them to prepare a defense before it's too late. Great plan, Tamsin said dryly. Except for the part where nobody listens. We have to try, Alec pressed, his gaze unwavering. The aliens aren't going to wait for us to sort out our differences. Jax leaned against a console, arms crossed. And what makes you think they'll listen this time? Last time we tried, we got dismissed faster than a politician's promise. Tamsin's gaze flicked to the holographic display, where the interplanetary highway was lit up like a neon artery. They'll listen when things start blowing up in their faces. And by then, it might be too late. Silence settled over the room, the weight of their situation pressing down like a lead blanket. It was the kind of silence that demanded action, even when no clear path presented itself. Alec nodded slowly. We can't afford to wait. We need to get ahead of this, or we're all screwed. Tamsin sighed, her mind racing. All right, let's see if we can't knock some sense into the powers that be. Jax smirked. And if that doesn't work, there's always plan B. Run for the hills. In space, Tamsin quirked an eyebrow. Good luck with that. Alec glanced between them, determination etched into his features. Get some rest. We'll reconvene in a few hours. I'll try to get through to Earth's representatives in the meantime. Good luck, Tamsin called as they made their way out of the control hub. You'll need it. Back aboard the tin can, Tamsin settled into the makeshift bunk, her body aching with exhaustion. Jax leaned against the wall, his expression contemplative. You ever think about quitting? He asked, breaking the silence. Tamsin snorted, a dry laugh bubbling up. Every damn day. But where else would I go? It's either this or a desk job, and I'd rather eat my own boots. Jax chuckled, shaking his head. You ever wonder why we do it, this whole mess? Because someone's gotta, Tamsin replied, her tone softer. And because deep down, I think we're both too stubborn to quit. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that only existed between two people who'd been through hell together and come out the other side. They didn't need to fill it with words. The shared understanding was enough. Tamsin shifted, fixing Jax with a wry smile. Besides, it's not like I have a better hobby lined up. True, Jax agreed. Though pottery's always an option. I hear it's therapeutic, yeah, until I start throwing pots instead of shaping them. Tamsin quipped, her eyes closing as sleep finally called. Hours later, they reconvened in the control hub, the atmosphere tense. Alec stood at the center, surrounded by screens and data feeds, his brow furrowed. Well, Jax asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Alec sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Earth's leadership is divided on the issue. Some want to prepare, others think it's a bluff. Typical, Tamsin muttered, frustration simmering beneath her skin. Bury their heads in the sand and hope for the best. We can't give up, Alec insisted. There's too much at stake. So what's the plan? Jax asked, arms crossed. Because I'm fresh out of magic wands and last-minute miracles. Alec's gaze was steely, determination burning bright. We need to gather intel, prove the threat is real. Show them what's coming before it's too late. Tamsin nodded, her resolve hardening. All right, let's find something they can't ignore. They set to work, scouring data feeds and intercepted communications for any scrap of evidence. Each piece of intel was a potential lifeline, a chance to avert disaster. Eyes bled into one another, fatigue clawing at the edges of their consciousness. But they pressed on, driven by the urgency of their task. Finally, Jax let out a triumphant noise, pointing to a flickering screen. Got something. Looks like our alien friends are amassing near the highway's midpoint. Tamsin leaned in, studying the display. That's not a bluff. That's a goddamn invitation to war. Alec nodded, his expression grim. We need to get this to Earth now. If this doesn't convince them, nothing will. They worked quickly, collating the data into a coherent message. Each second felt like an eternity, the weight of their mission pressing down with suffocating intensity. The message was sent, a digital plea hurtling through space. It was a gamble, a desperate move in a game where the stakes were nothing short of survival. Tamsin sank into a chair, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. Now we wait. Think they'll listen? Jax asked, the question heavy with doubt. They'd better, Tamsin replied, her gaze fixed on the stars beyond, or we're all in for a world of hurt. Alec's voice broke the silence, his tone resolute. We've done all we can. Now it's up to them. The hours ticked by, each one stretching out with agonizing slowness. They waited for a response, for any sign that their message had been received. Finally, the comm crackled to life, a familiar voice filling the room. We've received your intel, preparing defenses now. Relief washed over them, a brief respite in the face of looming disaster. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a start. Looks like they're finally paying attention, Jax remarked, a wry smile playing at his lips. Tamsin nodded, her gaze steady. About damn time. Alec's expression softened, gratitude mingling with determination. We're not out of the woods yet, but at least now we've got a fighting chance." They exchanged weary smiles, the bond forged through shared struggle unspoken but unbreakable. Tamsin leaned back, her expression thoughtful. "Here's hoping this is the start of something better. And if it's not," Jax asked, his tone light despite the gravity of their situation, "then we'll just have to make it better," Tamsin replied, her resolve unwavering. As they prepared for the battles to come, Tamsin allowed herself a moment of hope. It was a fragile thing, easily shattered, but in the darkness of space, even the smallest light could be enough to guide them forward. When the alien offensive finally began, it was less a thunderous invasion and more of a bureaucratic inconvenience wrapped in a cosmic migraine. The aliens, led by the enigmatic Zareth, descended upon the interplanetary highway like a swarm of overly ambitious termites with a superiority complex. Their ships, sleek and intimidating, cast shadows over the highway, blocking out the stars with their arrogant presence. Tamsin and Jax were back on the tin can, the ship vibrating with the kind of unease that came from being vastly outgunned and outclassed. Alex's voice crackled over the comm link, a beacon of stress in an already chaotic situation. "They've started jamming our systems," Alec reported, his tone a mix of urgency and exasperation. "We're blind here, perfect," Tamsin muttered, adjusting the controls with the finesse of a pianist trying to play a broken accordion. "Now we're not only screwed, but we're screwed and dumb." Jax, leaning back in his chair with the calm of a man who'd resigned himself to a colorful death, quipped, "At least dying in the dark means I won't see how ugly this crap gets." "Look on the bright side," Tamsin shot back. "We get to be the first to test Earth's latest and greatest screw-up." "You mean the bioshield," Jax replied, his voice dripping with skepticism. "The one they promised would work but never actually tested." "That's the one," Tamsin confirmed, her expression bright as a black hole. Because nothing says confidence like experimental tech in a life-or-death situation, with Earth's leadership embroiled in their usual pastime, pointing fingers, and doing absolutely nothing. Tamsin and her crew were left to rely on biotech innovations that were so fresh out of the lab they still smelled like failed grant proposals. The bioshield was supposed to be their ace in the hole, a brilliant piece of biological engineering that would absorb and redirect energy attacks. Supposed to being the operative phrase. "All right," Alex's voice cut through again, barely audible over the background hum of malfunctioning equipment. "Tamsin, you've got the plan," Tamsin echoed with a snort. "More like a wish on a prayer, but yeah, I've got it." She initiated the bioshield sequence, her fingers dancing over the console as she attempted to coax the experimental tech into doing something productive. The interface was user-friendly in the same way that juggling knives was a recommended pastime for children. "Activating the bioshield now," she announced, more to herself than anyone else, as a series of ominous beeps filled the cockpit. Jax leaned over, his expression curious. "What's that sound?" "That," Tamsin said, "is the sound of imminent failure and possible explosive decompression." Cheerful, right? As the bioshield sputtered to life, it became immediately apparent that experimental was just a polite way of saying, "We have no idea what this actually does." The shield shimmered weakly, like a mirage on a hot day, before promptly flickering out of existence with a dismissive fizzle. "Well, that's not ideal," Jax commented, scratching his chin thoughtfully. Tamsin glared at the console as though it had personally offended her. "No, really, I thought a flickering shield was just the latest trend in defense technology." Alex's voice came through again, strained but determined. "You've got to get it working, Tamsin. We're out of options here." "No pressure, right?" Tamsin retorted, her hands moving over the controls as she tried to coax life back into the shield. "Just save the universe single-handedly. Easy peasy." Outside, the alien ships were closing in, their weapon systems glowing ominously. Tamsin could almost see Zareth sitting smugly on his command deck, chuckling at the humans' pitiful attempts at resistance. Probably sipping on some futuristic cocktail and reminiscing about the good old days when they only had to outsmart other aliens, not a stubborn engineer with a death wish. "Could be worse," Jax offered, ever the optimist. "We could be dealing with Earth bureaucrats in person." "I'll take the aliens over them any day," Tamsin replied. "At least with aliens, the incompetence feels more earned." The console beeped again, this time with a slightly more encouraging tone. Tamsin watched as the bioshield flickered back to life, though it still looked about as reliable as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. "There, see," Jax said, giving her a thumbs up. "It's flickering with a bit more conviction now." "We're saved," Tamsin replied dryly, her eyes never leaving the console. "I can just see the headlines. Flickering shield saves humanity, engineer still miserable." The aliens, meanwhile, had begun their offensive. Energy blasts lit up the void, and the tin can rocked violently under the onslaught. The bioshield absorbed some of the impact, deflecting a few shots with all the enthusiasm of a half-hearted shrug. "Okay, so it works." sort of, Jack said, bracing himself as the ship shuddered. What's Plan B? Plan B, Tamsin echoed. Backup plan. In this economy, Alec chimed in, his voice a lifeline in the chaos. Tamsin, you might want to try rerouting power from non-essential systems. Non-essential systems? Tamsin glanced around the cockpit. You mean like the coffee maker? Desperate times, Alec replied, a hint of amusement in his voice despite the circumstances. I'll mourn later, Tamsin sighed, fingers flying over the console as she diverted power. The bio shield flared again, stronger this time, the flicker steadying into something resembling an actual defense. There we go, Jack said, nodding approvingly. Now it looks like it might actually stop something larger than a sneeze. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Tamsin replied, though she couldn't help but feel a sliver of hope. Let's see if it can withstand more than a stern talking to. The aliens continued their assault, relentless in their pursuit. Each hit against the shield felt like a personal slap in the face, a reminder of their precarious position and the fragility of their hopes. Tamsin gritted her teeth, her focus unwavering as she monitored the shield's integrity. We've got incoming, Jax warned, pointing to the display. Looks like the big guns are finally waking up, because things weren't exciting enough, Tamsin muttered, adjusting the shield's parameters. The energy readings spiked, the shield absorbing the impact with a reassuring hum. After what felt like an eternity, Alec's voice crackled through the comm again, infused with a sense of urgency. The highway's been cut off, but the alien ships are repositioning. They're trying to flank us. Great, Tamsin said, frowning at the tactical display. Nothing like a good flanking maneuver to spice things up. Any bright ideas besides running away screaming? Jax suggested, earning a snort from Tamsin. Stay focused, Alec advised. We need to hold until reinforcements arrive. Wonderful, Tamsin replied with more sarcasm than a sardonic cat. I'll just tell the aliens to kindly hold their fire until then. The tin can shuddered again, the bioshield straining under the assault. Tamsin's hands flew across the console, making adjustments with the precision of a surgeon performing open-heart surgery during an earthquake. We can do this, she said, more to herself than anyone else. We've faced worse. Yeah, like that time the coffee machine broke down, Jax agreed. That was a dark day, despite the dire situation. Tamsin couldn't help but chuckle. You're right. This is nothing compared to caffeine withdrawal. The alien ships closed in, their formation tightening like a noose. Tamsin's heart pounded in her chest, but she pushed aside the fear, focusing instead on the task at hand. She'd never been one to back down from a challenge, and she wasn't about to start now. All right, she said, determination etched into every word. Let's show these aliens what humanity's made of. The bioshield flared to life, a shimmering barrier of defiance against the darkness. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and sometimes that was enough. As the battle raged on, Tamsin couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing a game of cosmic chicken, hurtling towards an uncertain future with nothing but stubbornness and a flickering shield to guide them. But if there was one thing she knew, it was that humanity had a knack for surviving the impossible, and as long as they had breath in their bodies and a ship beneath their feet, they'd keep fighting. Think we'll make it? Jax asked, his gaze fixed on the alien ships. Tamsin shrugged, her eyes never leaving the console. Who knows? But if we go down, we'll go down swinging. The comm crackled again, Alec's voice filled with a mix of relief and urgency. Reinforcements are on their way. Just hold a little longer. Heard you the first time, Tamsin replied, a small smile playing at her lips. We're not going anywhere. As the reinforcements arrived, the tide of battle began to turn. The alien ships hesitated, their formation faltering under the renewed assault. Tamsin felt a surge of triumph, tempered by the knowledge that the fight was far from over. But for now, they stood their ground, defiant in the face of adversity. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them going, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Ready for round two? Jax asked, his expression a mix of determination and grim humor. Always, Tamsin replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Let's show them what we're made of. With the bioshield flickering defiantly, they prepared for the next wave. Because in space, as in life, the only constant was change, and sometimes all you could do was adapt and hope for the best. As the alien ships regrouped, Tamsin felt a familiar resolve settle over her. It was a feeling born from countless battles, from the knowledge that no matter how dark the night, the dawn would come, and as long as they had each other, they'd face whatever came next. In the end, it wasn't just about survival. It was about standing up against the odds, about fighting for what mattered most. It was about the spirit of humanity, unbowed and unbroken. And as the stars shone brightly in the void, Tamsin knew they'd find a way. Tamsin grimaced as the tin can limped through the wreckage-strewn vastness of space, the ship groaning like an old man forced to jog uphill. The bioshield had held, but just like a politician's promise, it was only a matter of time before it let them down. Outside, alien ships buzzed around like a pack of hungry wolves, just waiting for the moment to pounce. What now? Jax asked, his usual calm slightly cracked around the edges, like a poorly made ceramic mug. We retreat, Tamsin replied, tapping furiously at the console that seemed to have developed a new aversion to cooperation. Find some hole to crawl into until we figure out how to kick these guys in the shiny bits. Retreat? I thought humans never retreated. Jax's grin was almost convincing, a mask of bravado that failed to hide the worry lines forming on his forehead. Retreat is just a fancy word for we'll be back to kick your ass later. Tamsin's fingers moved with the speed of desperation across the console, trying to coax a bit more speed out of the wheezing engines. The interplanetary highway was closing behind them, a curtain of stars blotted out by the expanding alien blockade. Alex's voice crackled through the comm link again, this time a touch more frantic. Tamsin, you need to find cover. There's an old space station not too far from your position. It's derelict, but it should hold up against a light bombardment. A derelict space station, Tamsin made a face. Nothing like hiding in a floating junkyard to make you feel like a winner. Hey, it's better than nothing, Jax said, peering over her shoulder at the nav chart. And maybe it's a real fixer-upper. It'd be a fun project, sure, if I wanted to spend my free time turning tetanus into a lifestyle, Tamsin muttered, punching in the coordinates. Let's hope this station's got enough walls to keep the vacuum of space where it belongs. The tin can lurched forward, engines sputtering like a smoker's cough, as the derelict station loomed into view. It looked like someone had taken a scrapyard and decided to see what a space station would look like after being run over by a comet. Holes gaped in the structure like rotten teeth, and the whole thing spun lazily, caught in the gravitational pull of its own despair. Home sweet home, Tamsin said dryly as they docked with an uncharacteristic jolt. The airlock creaked open, and the musky scent of stale air and failure wafted through the ship. Jax sniffed. Well, at least we know no one's cleaned this place in a while. Yeah, and no one's rented it out for a while either, Tamsin replied, stepping through the airlock with all the enthusiasm of a condemned prisoner. The interior of the station was dark, the only illumination coming from the flickering emergency lights that cast eerie shadows on the walls. All right, Tamsin said, clapping her hands together. First order of business, let's find something we can use to patch up the tin can, then maybe see if this place has a working comm system. Might be nice to call for help that isn't a half-baked promise. Jax nodded, his eyes scanning the gloom. And let's keep an eye out for any friendly ghosts. Wouldn't want to disturb any long-term residents. They moved through the corridors, the sound of their footsteps echoing like whispers in a cathedral. The place was a museum of outdated technology, consoles and panels that looked like they ran on steam and good intentions. Tamsin couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia for an era she'd never known, the age of do-it-yourself spacefarers who thought they could conquer the stars with duct tape and a dream. So, what's the plan? Jax asked as they entered what appeared to be the main control room. The consoles here were dead, the screens blank and lifeless. Tamsin sighed, looking around the room like a chef inspecting a kitchen after a frat party. We patch up, we regroup, and I tinker with this biotech breakthrough I've been noodling with. If we're lucky, we'll have something resembling a plan before the aliens find us and decide we look like a fun piñata. A breakthrough. Jax raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. Couldn't you have mentioned that before? Only if you wanted the details on how I've been repurposing the coffee maker to synthesize bioshield components, Tamsin replied, a mischievous grin tugging at her lips. I was saving it as a conversation starter for first dates. They set to work, Tamsin's fingers deftly dismantling and reassembling machinery with the precision of a surgeon who'd had one too many cups of coffee. Jack scavenged for anything that looked remotely useful, occasionally holding up some odd piece of tech with an expression that said, "Is this a thing?" Time passed in a haze of sweat and curses, the air filled with the sounds of clanging metal and the occasional zzz-zap of a misbehaving circuit. The station was a treasure trove of forgotten technology, a giant puzzle waiting to be solved by someone with the patience and insanity to try. Hey, look at this, Jax called from beneath a pile of disused equipment. He held up a small, sleek device that looked suspiciously like a universal translator. Tamsin took it, turning it over in her hands. Might come in handy if Zareth decides to invite us over for tea, or, a public execution. Could be fun, Jax said cheerfully. I've always wanted to make an alien laugh. Tamsin rolled her eyes, but she couldn't suppress a smile. Yeah, and if it doesn't work, we can always use it as a paperweight. It was in these moments of light-hearted banter that the enormity of their situation seemed to fade, replaced by the warmth of companionship and the thrill of the challenge. For a brief moment, Tamsin allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. But reality has a way of stomping on dreams with hobnailed boots. The comm link crackled to life, Alex's voice cutting through the air like a knife. Tamsin, the aliens know where you are. They're closing in fast. Fantastic, Tamsin muttered. Just when I'd started thinking this place had real estate potential. How long do we have? Jax asked, his voice tight with concern. Minutes maybe, Alec replied. I'll try to buy you some time, but don't count on it. Tamsin's mind raced, her fingers dancing over the console as she desperately tried to wring some kind of advantage from the decrepit station. Jax, keep an eye on those panels. If you see anything that looks like a defense system, make it dance. And if I don't, Jax asked, already moving to comply, then we hope our charm and good looks are enough to save us, Tamsin replied with a wry grin, or at least buy us a mercy killing. The station shuddered as something exploded in the distance, a dull thud that reverberated through the metal bones of the structure. Tamsin worked faster, her mind a whirlwind of calculations and half-formed ideas. If she could just get the biotech to integrate with the station systems, maybe they could create a shield powerful enough to buy them some time. Got it, Jax shouted triumphantly, jabbing at a panel with a manic gleam in his eye. A series of lights flickered to life, and a low hum filled the air as the station's ancient defense system sputtered into action. Good job, Jax, Tamsin said, her voice tight with concentration. Now let's see if we can make this old bird sing. With a final flourish of keystrokes, Tamsin activated the biotech interface, watching anxiously as the bioshield components began to merge with the station's defenses. It was a gamble, a Hail Mary pass with all the odds stacked against them, but if it worked, they'd have a fighting chance. The station's defenses roared to life, a cacophony of energy beams and kinetic barriers forming a protective cocoon around them. The alien ships hesitated, their formation breaking apart as they reevaluated their attack. We did it, Jax breathed, disbelief and relief warring in his eyes. Not yet, Tamsin warned, her gaze fixed on the tactical display. They'll regroup, and when they do, we need to be ready. As the derelict station became their fortress, Tamsin felt a fierce pride swell within her. They'd done the impossible, turned a heap of scrap into a sanctuary. But the fight was far from over, and the real challenge lay ahead. All right, she said, determination hardening her voice. Let's show these aliens what humans can do when we've got our backs against the wall. Jax nodded, his expression a mirror of her own resolve. Think they'll underestimate us again? Tamsin smirked, her hands already moving back to the console. If they do, it'll be the last mistake they ever make. As the alien ships regrouped for another attack, Tamsin and Jax prepared for the next round, their spirits lifted by the taste of victory. The odds were still against them, but they'd faced worse and come out on top. And as long as they hit each other, they'd keep fighting, keep pushing, keep surviving, because in the end, it was more than just a battle. It was proof that humanity, in all its flawed, stubborn glory, could stand against the darkness and refuse to be extinguished. The station groaned under the weight of its own misery, an orchestra of creaks and groans that made Tamsin wonder if it was trying to say something profound, probably along the lines of, "Get out while you still can." But like every other time in her life, she wasn't about to listen to reason. She had a ship to fix, an alien armada to evade, and a nagging feeling that today was not her lucky day. "Come on, you piece of junk," she muttered under her breath, her fingers flying across the console like a pianist at a recital for the damned. The station's systems were older than her grandmother's recipes and twice as cryptic. But there was something comforting about them, like a jigsaw puzzle with pieces that almost fit if you bent the rules a little. Jax leaned against a nearby panel, arms crossed and wearing a smirk that could melt ice, or at least slightly warm it. "So what do we do if this place falls apart before the aliens do it for us?" "Well, we could always hitch a ride on one of their ships," Tamsin replied, not missing a beat. "I hear they've got great in-flight service." "Yeah, until they blast us out of the airlock," Jax said, kicking at a loose piece of metal on the floor. It skittered away, echoing down the hallway like a coin in a beggar's bowl. The comm link crackled again, the grating sound of static heralding Alec's voice. "Tamsin, I managed to reroute some power. You might get a few more minutes before the aliens start thinking we're a buffet table." "Great, just enough time to do my hair," she shot back, glancing at the tactical display. The alien ships were regrouping, their predatory grace making her itch to do something drastic. Like throw a wrench at them or maybe just scream into the void. Alec's voice was strained, like he was squeezing every word through a sieve. "Listen, Lath is on his way. He's got a plan." "Oh joy, another plan," Tamsin said, rolling her eyes. "Can't wait to hear what suicidal escapade he's cooked up this time." Jax straightened, all bravado replaced by a serious concern. "Lath's coming here." "Is he crazy?" "Debatable," Alec replied, "but I'm not the one arguing with him. Good luck, we're gonna need it." The comm went dead, the silence leaving a void that was filled with the distant rumble of approaching doom. Tamsin felt a knot form in her stomach, part nerves, part dread, and a healthy dose of recycled air. "Guess this is it then," Jax said, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. "Our hero's entrance, or exit," she quipped, though her heart wasn't in it. They both knew what Lath coming meant. The old man had a habit of turning up just when things were about to go sideways, like a grim omen with a penchant for dramatic flourishes. A shudder ran through the station, a reminder that time was short and distractions were a luxury they couldn't afford. Tamsin dove back into her work, the rhythm of her movements a calming mantra. The station's systems were a mess, the kind that made her want to punch something, and not in a therapeutic way, but she was getting somewhere maybe. Jax rummaged through a pile of dusty equipment, pulling out a tangle of wires with a victorious grin. "Look what I found." "Think it'll help if it doesn't explode, probably," Tamsin replied, taking the mess from him. "You're a real treasure hunter, you know that. Just call me the Indiana Jones of space junk," he shot back, flashing her a grin that was more bravado than anything else. They worked in silence for a while, the weight of impending disaster looming like a specter over their shoulders. Tamsin could feel the pressure mounting, a vice tightening around her chest, but there was no room for doubt, no time for second-guessing. Not now. The intercom crackled again, but this time it wasn't Alec. It was Laith, his voice as gravelly as a Martian sandstorm. "Tamsin, you better have something up your sleeve because I'm bringing the party to you." "Great, I'll bake a cake," she replied, her tone dry enough to soak up a flood. "Just keep the candles lit," Laith said, his voice cutting out with a burst of static. The station shuddered violently as the alien ships began their approach in earnest. Tamsin watched their ominous progression on the tactical display, her mind racing with possibilities, and the stark realization that they were running out of options. Laith arrived with all the subtlety of a meteor strike, his ship docking with a groan of metal that made Tamsin wince. He emerged from the airlock like a storm in human form, grizzled, grim-faced, and with a fire in his eyes that dared the universe to try and snuff it out. "Nice place you've got here," he said, nodding at the dilapidated control room. "Cozy. If you're into industrial chic," Tamsin shot back, not bothering to hide her relief at seeing him. Even if his presence meant things were about to get even more complicated, Laith wasted no time, moving to the console and punching in commands with a deftness that belied his age. "We need to buy more time. The aliens are jamming most of our systems, but I've got a few tricks left." "You always do," Tamsin replied, watching as he worked. "What's the plan?" "Besides not dying, I mean," Laith grunted, his focus razor-sharp. "It's a long shot, but if we can overload their sensors, we might be able to slip past the blockade. But it'll take everything we've got." "Everything?" Jax echoed, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean by everything?" Laith paused, meeting Tamsin's gaze with a gravity that sent chills down her spine. "I'll have to stay behind. Someone needs to manually engage the override, and I'm the only one who can do it." Tamsin's heart dropped like a stone. "No, there has to be another way." "There isn't," Laith said, his voice steady, unyielding. "This is the only way to give you a chance." But she started, only to be cut off by a gentle but firm hand on her shoulder. "Tamsin, listen," he said, his voice softening. "You've got the talent, the drive. You can make it out of this, but not if we're all caught here when the aliens come calling. Let me do this. It's what I'm here for." She wanted to argue, to insist that there had to be another way, but the look in his eyes told her that he'd already made his decision, and as much as it tore at her, she knew he was right. "Okay," she said, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "But you better make it count." Laith gave her a nod, the kind that spoke volumes without saying a damn thing. "Always do." With that, he turned back to the console, his fingers flying over the keys in a blur of motion. Tamsin and Jax watched, their helplessness a tangible thing. The station shuddered again, a reminder that time was slipping through their fingers. Tamsin felt a pang of regret, a thousand unsaid things pressing against her mind, but there was no time for that now. No time for goodbyes or I'm sorry's or please don't goes. "Ready?" Laith asked, his voice calm, resolute. Tamsin swallowed, her throat tight. "As I'll ever be." "Then go," he said, flashing them a grin that was more defiance than amusement. "And don't look back. I'll handle the rest." With a final nod, Tamsin turned, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She and Jax headed for the airlock, the path ahead murky and fraught with 1,000 uncertainties. "You know," Jax said, his voice a low murmur, "he's one hell of a guy." "Yeah," Tamsin replied, her voice thick with emotion. "He is." The ship's engines roared to life, a thunderous promise of escape. As they pulled away from the station, Tamsin couldn't help but glance back, a silent farewell to the man who'd taught her everything she knew, and who was now giving her the most precious gift of all, a chance. The alien ships loomed closer, their formation shifting like a storm on the horizon. Tamsin gripped the controls, her mind a blur of calculations and half-formed plans. "What's the play, Tamsin?" Jax asked, his voice steadying her, anchoring her to the moment. "We keep moving," she said, determination hardening her resolve. "We keep fighting, and we make damn sure Laith's sacrifice wasn't for nothing." The ship surged forward, defying the odds with every breathless moment. Tamsin felt a fierce pride swell within her, a burning refusal to surrender, even as the darkness closed in. And as the alien ships roared to life once more, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would fight to the bitter end and beyond if she had to. because in the vast, unending expanse of space, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about survival, about standing against the tide and refusing to be swept away. The odds were against them, the darkness was closing in. But as long as they drew breath, they would fight, they would defy, they would endure, because that, in the end, was what it meant to be human. Tamsin had always thought of herself as a problem solver. Throw a wrench in her plan, and she'd use it to fix whatever broke next. But staring out into the vastness of space, with alien ships lurking like hungry predators, she felt more like the wrench than the wielder. Jax hunkered down beside her, fiddling with the ship's controls. You know, I always thought our end would come with more fanfare, a little less death by alien and more exploding in a blaze of glory. Yeah, well, Tamsin replied, life's full of disappointments. Like that time you thought you could win at poker against an AI. Spoiler alert, you can't, he snorted. Don't remind me. It's hard to look cool while losing your shirt to a machine. Maybe that's your problem, she shot back. You're trying to look cool, I'm just trying to not get shot. The ship bucked beneath them, a reminder that the universe didn't care about their banter. It had bigger, nastier things to throw at them, like alien armadas. The comm crackled, a familiar intrusion. Alex's voice, strained and tinny, cut through the static. Tamsin, any brilliant ideas? Because we're fresh out over here. Tamsin's brain was a whirlwind of half-formed plans and desperate gambles, none of which seemed remotely good. If I had a nickel for every time I heard that today, Alex's laugh was humorless, you'd be rich enough to buy your own happy ending. If only life accepted nickels instead of blood, Jax added, his sarcasm a thin veneer over real nerves. But then a thought flitted through her mind, something Lath had mentioned once in his endless ramblings about space-time and biospheres. Something about Earth's ability to regenerate, to adapt. It was a crazy idea, but crazy was all they had left. Wait, she said, eyes narrowing. Maybe there's something we can do. Jax raised an eyebrow. Do tell, O wise one. I could use a distraction from impending doom. Tamsin chewed her lip, thinking aloud. Earth's biosphere. Lath always said it was underutilized. All that biological potential just sitting there, waiting to be harnessed. Great, Jax said dryly. We're gonna throw trees at them. More like bioweapons, she corrected, the gears in her head turning. If we can tweak our biotech solutions using Earth's biosphere, maybe we can give the aliens a nasty surprise. Alec, listening in, sounded intrigued. You think it could work? Tamsin shrugged, though she realized he couldn't see it. I think we've got a 2% chance of it not blowing up in our faces, but those odds are better than zero, so we're back to everything we've got, Jax said, shaking his head. All in on a bad hand. Wouldn't be the first time, Tamsin replied. And if we're lucky, not the last. With newfound determination, they dove into the ship systems, fingers flying over consoles as they worked to reroute power and recalibrate their biotech arrays. It was like trying to perform surgery during a rock slide, but they didn't have the luxury of a steady hand. How long do you think we've got? Jax asked, casting a wary glance at the tactical display where the alien ships crept ever closer. Long enough to do something stupid, hopefully, Tamsin replied, her voice a blend of focus and frenetic energy. Despite the chaos, there was a rhythm to their work, a heady sense of purpose that drowned out the fear. If Lath could make a stand, so could they. And maybe, just maybe, they'd come out on the other side with a fighting chance. Got it, Alec called over the comms, a note of triumph in his voice. Powers rerouted, you should be good to go. Great, Tamsin said. Now let's see if we can't turn the tables on these bastards. Jax grinned, a sharp edge to his expression. Nothing like a little poetic justice, huh? More like cosmic irony, she replied, her fingers dancing over the keys. But I'll take what I can get. The ship shuddered again as their systems came online, a throbbing hum of potential energy that sizzled through the air. Tamsin felt a thrill of anticipation, a flicker of hope amidst the gloom. All right, she said, her voice steady. Let's show these aliens what humans are made of. With a final nod to Jax, she activated the recalibrated biotech systems, a surge of bioenergy cascading through the ship's circuits. There was no going back now. They were committed, for better or worse. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the alien ships shuddered on the display, their sleek forms flickering as they struggled to adapt to the sudden influx of biointerference. Ha, Jax barked out a laugh, his eyes wide with elation. It's working. Tamsin's heart skipped a beat, a wild mix of disbelief and exhilaration. For now, she cautioned. But don't break out the champagne just yet. Alec's voice crackled over the comms, his excitement palpable. Whatever you did, keep doing it. They're pulling back, trying to regroup. Okay, Tamsin said, letting out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Let's not waste this opportunity. Together, they worked to exploit their advantage, maneuvering the ship with newfound agility as they weaved through the space debris. I think we might actually make it out of this, Jax said, his voice tinged with awe. She chuckled, a dark, hollow sound. Don't get too comfortable. The universe hates a happy ending. But despite her words, hope was a persistent thing, clawing its way into her heart and refusing to let go. They weren't out of the woods yet, but for the first time, she allowed herself to think they might just find their way through. With each passing minute, the alien presence diminished, their ship struggling to counter the unexpected assault. It was a small victory, but in the grand scheme of the universe, small victories were often all that stood between survival and oblivion. Looks like they're retreating, Alec reported, a note of disbelief coloring his tone. Tamsin's shoulders sagged with relief. For now, she agreed. We've bought ourselves some time, at least. Jax punched the air triumphantly, and all it took was a bit of good old-fashioned human ingenuity and a healthy disregard for safety protocols, she added wryly. Their laughter was a fragile thing, but it was real, a testament to their resilience. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together, with sarcasm and snark and a sheer refusal to give in. As they forged ahead, the ship's systems whirring contentedly, Tamsin allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that Lath's sacrifice hadn't been in vain, that they might just live to fight another day. Think we'll get a parade when we get back? Jax asked, an irreverent grin spreading across his face. Tamsin smirked. Knowing our luck, we'll probably get a bill for all the damages, but even as she joked, there was a warmth in her chest, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they shared, forged in the crucible of disaster. Here's to making it, Jax said, raising an imaginary glass. To survival, Tamsin agreed, clinking her own imaginary glass against his. And giving the universe the finger, with a shared look they returned to their task, a renewed sense of purpose driving them forward. The odds still loomed dauntingly large, the path ahead fraught with danger, but they were human after all, and that, Tamsin decided, was something worth celebrating. As the ship hurtled through the expanse of space, the stars blurring past in a streak of light and shadow, Tamsin allowed herself a moment of reflection. They had defied the odds, pulled a rabbit out of the proverbial hat, and lived to fight another day. Sure, the universe was still a vast, uncaring void. Sure, the alien threat lingered on the edges of their consciousness, a shadow waiting to descend. But for now, they had something they hadn't had in a long time, hope, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As Jax fiddled with the nav chart, plotting their course back to Earth, Tamsin felt a surge of determination. They would return armed with their newfound insights and ready for whatever came next. Think anyone will believe us? Jax asked, eyeing the nav chart with a critical eye. Tamsin shrugged. Does it matter? They'll see soon enough, he nodded, a fierce light in his eyes. Yeah, we'll make them see. The ship's engines purred contentedly, the hum of their biotech systems a constant reminder of the power they wielded, the potential they had yet to tap. To the next adventure, Tamsin said, her voice filled with a quiet conviction. Jax grinned, his usual irreverence tempered by a new sense of purpose. And whatever madness it brings. As the ship surged forward, a streak of defiance against the dark, Tamsin felt the weight of Lath's sacrifice, the enormity of their task. But alongside that, there was a fierce pride, a fire that burned in her soul and drove her to keep fighting, to keep pushing against the tide, because that, in the end, was what it meant to be human. To stand, to fight, and to endure, even in the face of insurmountable odds. The universe might be vast and uncaring, but they were small, stubborn, and unwilling to go quietly. And as long as there was breath in their bodies, they would continue to defy the darkness, to carve their place amongst the stars. And so, with hope rekindled and determination renewed, they sailed on, into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Because in the end, it was not the destination that mattered, but the journey, and they were just getting started. The tin can rattled through space like a tin can, fitting, really, for a ship held together with little more than duct tape and a prayer. Tamsin Everhart glared at the console, willing it to do its job and not explode in a shower of sparks. Jax was beside her, fingers dancing over the ship's controls like a concert pianist with a death wish. Think they'll come back? Jax's question hung in the air like a bad smell. Probably, Tamsin replied, not looking up. We're like a bad rash. Hard to ignore and hard to get rid of. Alec's voice crackled over the comms. You sure you want to poke the hornet's nest again? Tamsin snorted. What's life without a little risk? Besides, Zareth and his merry band of aliens need a lesson in humility. Lesson in humility? Sounds more like a suicide note, Jax quipped. Semantics, Tamsin shot back, flashing him a grin that was all teeth and no warmth. Let's just make sure we're the ones delivering it. The ship's biotech systems hummed with energy, a testament to their cobbled-together genius. It was like trying to milk a cow blindfolded, messy, risky, and prone to going spectacularly wrong. But sometimes it paid off. At least that was the hope. All right, Tamsin said, glancing at Jax. Let's see if we can't make these bastards regret ever waking up this morning. Jax's fingers flew over the nav chart, plotting a course that took them right into the heart of the alien fleet. You really enjoy living on the edge, don't you? Wouldn't have it any other way, she replied, her voice laced with dry humor. Keeps things interesting. As they hurtled toward the alien ships, Tamsin's mind was a whirl of calculations and contingency plans. The aliens were regrouping, their sleek forms nearly blotting out the stars. Their bioshield was holding, but for how long was anybody's guess. "Time to dance," Tamsin murmured, her fingers flying over the console as she activated the biotech systems. A surge of bioenergy rippled through the ship, a pulse that resonated in Tamsin's bones. The alien ships hesitated, their movements stuttering as they tried to process the unexpected interference. "Looks like we've got their attention," Jack said, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Good, let's give them a show," Tamsin replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The alien ships shifted, regrouping as they struggled to counter the biotech assault. It was like watching a flock of startled birds, chaotic and mesmerizing. "Come on, you overgrown glowsticks," Tamsin muttered under her breath. "Let's see what you're made of." The first volley of energy bolts arced toward the tin can, a brilliant display of alien firepower that could turn them into space dust. But Tamsin was ready, her fingers dancing over the controls as she maneuvered the ship with a precision that bordered on reckless. "Smooth moves," Jax commented, his voice tinged with admiration. "You should see me parallel park," Tamsin shot back, her focus unbroken. The alien ships shuddered under the onslaught of biotech interference, their sleek forms flickering as they struggled to maintain cohesion. It was working for now, but Tamsin knew better than to trust in temporary victories. "Keep it up," Alex's voice urged over the comms. "They're faltering, like a bad date," Jax quipped. "Can't take the heat." "Let's turn up the temperature then," Tamsin replied, a grin tugging at the corners of her mouth. With a deft hand, she adjusted the biotech systems, flooding the alien fleet with a surge of interference that set their sensors scrambling. The aliens faltered, their formations breaking apart like a cheap puzzle. "Ha, take that, you cosmic pricks," Jax crowed, his eyes alight with triumph. But Tamsin wasn't celebrating yet. The aliens were clever, resourceful, and likely plotting their next move. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. "Don't get cocky," she warned, even as her heart soared with the thrill of the fight. "We've still got work to do." The alien ships scattered, retreating under the relentless biotech assault. It was a beautiful sight, one that filled Tamsin with a grim satisfaction. "Looks like they're calling it a day," Jax observed, his tone a mix of surprise and delight. "For now," Tamsin agreed, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. "But they'll be back, and we need to be ready when they are." Alex's voice crackled over the comms, a blend of relief and urgency. "We've bought ourselves some time. Let's use it wisely." "Wise words," Jack said, nodding. "Now if only we had a plan that didn't involve certain death. Where's the fun in that?" Tamsin replied, her voice light despite the gravity of their situation. With the alien ships retreating, Tamsin and her team set to work reinforcing their systems, repairing what they could, and preparing for the next inevitable confrontation. It was a race against time, a battle of wits against an enemy that was as relentless as they were mysterious. "Think we've got a chance?" Jax asked, his voice soft, almost hopeful. Tamsin paused, considering. "Honestly, I don't know, but we're not dead yet, and that's a win in my book." "High standards," Jax remarked with a wry chuckle. "Hey, if I aimed any lower, I'd be digging a grave," Tamsin shot back, her smile shadowed by the weight of reality. As they worked, a sense of camaraderie settled over the crew, a shared understanding that they were all in this together. It was a fragile thing, easily broken, but for now it was enough. "Here's to surviving another day," Jack said, raising an imaginary glass. "May tomorrow be slightly less terrible," Tamsin replied, clinking her own invisible glass against his. With the immediate threat diminished, they turned their attention to the future, to the challenges that lay ahead. The aliens would return, of that there was no doubt, but Tamsin was ready, her mind a whirl of strategy and defiance. "Think they'll underestimate us again?" Jax asked, his voice laced with sarcasm. "If they do, they deserve everything they get," Tamsin replied, her tone fierce and unyielding. The universe was a harsh, uncaring place, but Tamsin had never been one to back down from a fight, and as long as there was breath in her body, she would continue to defy the odds, to carve a future for herself and her crew amidst the stars. "To the next battle," she said, her voice strong and resolute. "And the chaos it brings," Jax added with a grin. Together they faced the uncertainty of space with a determination that burned like a beacon in the dark. The future was uncertain, their path fraught with danger and hardship, but they were human, stubborn, and unyielding, and that was something worth celebrating. As the tin can sailed on, its systems humming with potential, Tamsin allowed herself a moment of hope. They had defied the odds, faced down an enemy that seemed insurmountable, and lived to tell the tale. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The alien threat might linger on the horizon, a constant shadow in the vastness of space. But for now, they had something precious, something that couldn't be measured or quantified: hope. And with that, they would face whatever came next, ready and willing to take on the universe with sarcasm, snark, and an unwavering determination to survive. Because in the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about fighting, about enduring, about standing tall even when the odds were stacked against them. And that, Tamsin decided, was more than enough. The Tinkin limped back onto the interplanetary highway, sputtering and groaning like a retiree after a weekend bender. Tamsin Everhart leaned back in her chair, exhausted but not quite defeated. Well, that was a day in paradise, she muttered, rubbing the ache in her temples like she could massage the stress away. Spoiler, she couldn't. Jax was sprawled in the co-pilot's seat, feet kicked up like he owned the place. "Think we'll get a raise for this?" he asked, eyes flicking over the ship's controls with casual disdain. Tamsin snorted. "Yeah, right. I'm sure the higher-ups will shower us with gratitude and riches the moment we touch dirt. In reality, we'll be lucky if they don't charge us for damages." Alex's voice crackled through the comms, carrying the tone of someone who'd just downed a double shot of reality check. "At least we didn't become cosmic roadkill. I call that a win. Can't argue with that," Tamsin admitted, though her voice oozed skepticism like an old sponge squeezed once too often. They drifted in the void, the remnants of alien ships merely twinkling debris now, a twinkle that mocked the grandeur of space battles as much as a cheap plastic star on a Christmas tree. Tamsin's eyes lingered on the tactical display, the glowing dots that marked their victory, temporary though it might be. "Guess we taught Zareth a lesson. If teaching a lesson means kicking someone in the shins and running away before they can retaliate," Jax quipped. "Hey, whatever works," Tamsin replied with a shrug. "I'm a fan of the low blow if it means living to fight another day." The Tinkin hummed contentedly, like a cat that had just been fed but still held a grudge about the brand of kibble. They'd gotten through this by the skin of their teeth, if they'd had teeth, which they thankfully didn't, because dental work in space was a nightmare. "Think Zareth's licking his wounds?" Jax asked, staring out at the specks of alien wreckage spinning slowly into nothingness. "Probably plotting his next move with the intensity of a soap opera villain," Tamsin replied. "But for now he's got a bruised ego to nurse, an ego the size of a black hole." Alec chimed in, his voice a dry chuckle over the comms. "Should have seen it coming," Jax said. "Aliens with superiority complexes aren't exactly new. You mean like humanity?" Tamsin shot back. Jax grinned. "Touché," they let the silence stretch, comfortable in its awkwardness, each lost in their thoughts, a mix of relief, weariness, and the gnawing certainty that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "Let's head to the derelict space station," Tamsin suggested after a while. "We could use a breather. And maybe patch up what's left of this rust bucket." "Finally, a plan that doesn't involve becoming space dust," Jax said, punching in the coordinates. "I'm all for a little R&R, define rest and relaxation," Alex's voice piped up. "Last time we stopped there, the place almost fell apart around us." "Exactly," Tamsin replied. "It's familiar territory." They set course for the station, the Tinkin rattling along like a cart on a cobblestone street. The nav chart flickered, the ship's systems struggling to keep up with the demands of modern space travel, or any kind of travel, really. As the station loomed into view, a hulking shadow in the fragile light of distant stars, Jax whistled low. "Home sweet home, if by home you mean an abandoned structure that's one power surge away from imploding," Tamsin said. "Then yeah, sweet home." Docking was smoother than expected, which was saying something considering the Tinkin's penchant for dramatic entrances. The station's airlock wheezed open like an asthmatic dragon, and Tamsin stepped inside, her boots clicking on the metal floor with a rhythm that felt almost reassuring. "I swear every time we come here, this place looks more like my uncle's garage," Jax said, eyeing the cluttered corridors with a blend of disgust and nostalgia. "Your uncle ran a junkyard, didn't he?" Alec asked. "Exactly." They settled into the cramped quarters of the station, spreading out like ants exploring a crumb. With the alien threat temporarily abated, conversation flowed easier, the kind reserved for those who'd faced death and lived to laugh about it. "Remember that time you tried to fix the ship's console with chewing gum?" Jax asked, a wicked gleam in his eyes. Tamsin chuckled, shaking her head. "Hey, it worked." "For 5 minutes, 5 minutes more than I'd have given it," Alec said, joining them at a rickety table that groaned under the weight of its own existence. As they shared stories, some embellished, others stark with the raw edge of truth, they began to piece together the patchwork of victories and losses, the scars worn like badges and the laughter masking the fear that had been their constant companion. "Think Earth will throw us a parade?" Jax asked, his tone a mix of hope and sarcasm. "Yeah, right after they stopped bickering over whose incompetence almost got us killed," Alec replied. "Besides, parades are just an excuse to sell overpriced snacks," Tamsin added. "And we all know the best snacks are the free ones you steal from the mess hall." Ayers drifted by in a haze of stories and the shared camaraderie of survivors. The station systems whirred around them, the creaks and groans a strangely comforting backdrop to their conversation. "Here's to surviving," Jack said, raising a cup of something that smelled suspiciously like engine lubricant. "And to the chaos it brings," Tamsin replied, clinking her cup against his. The night, or what passed for night in the perpetual twilight of the station, deepened, and they turned their thoughts to the future, to what lay beyond the next horizon. The aliens would return, of that there was no doubt, but Tamsin felt a flicker of hope, a stubborn flame that refused to die out. "Think we made a difference?" Alec asked, his voice quiet, almost introspective. Tamsin considered the question, weighing it against the backdrop of a universe that often seemed indifferent to human suffering. "We live to fight another day. That's more than most get." "High standards," Jack said, echoing her earlier words with a grin. "Hey, if we aimed any lower, we'd be digging our own graves," Tamsin replied. They drifted into silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the station's hum lulling them into a sense of security that might have been false but was welcome nonetheless. "Here's to not being dead yet," Jack said after a while, breaking the silence with a grin. "And to whatever insanity tomorrow brings," Tamsin replied, her smile a mirror of his. As they settled in for the night, the station's lights dimming to a soft glow, Tamsin allowed herself a moment of peace, a brief respite from the endless struggle that had become their lives. They had defied the odds, faced down an enemy that seemed insurmountable, and lived to tell the tale. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The alien threat might linger on the horizon, a constant shadow in the vastness of space. But for now, they had something precious, something that couldn't be measured or quantified: hope. And with that, they would face whatever came next, ready and willing to take on the universe with sarcasm, snark, and an unwavering determination to survive. Because in the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about fighting, about enduring, about standing tall even when the odds were stacked against them. And that, Tamsin decided, was more than enough.